downgrade rights in Microsoft licensing. There's no such thing. As I worded them, as we tend to talk between licensing consultants, we call them downgrade rights. But downgrade rights themselves in this particular with this particular name, they don't exist. I don't know if that's a big surprise to you. It was a big surprise to me when I decided to study this topic thoroughly, to find all the definitions. They used to exist like this many years ago. But nowadays, what they called, by the way, if you just search for downgrade rights on the product terms website or in product terms, in the current product terms, you won't find that. So there'll probably be a few instances when you will see the word downgrade not related to downgrade rights. The rights themselves do exist, but the official name for them is rights to use other versions, as it's written in the slide. I'm reading from the slide. Rights to use other versions and lower editions. And that actually, this definition, rights to use other versions and lower editions, combines two things in one. Downgrading of a version, say from 2021 or 2019 to 2016. That's the version downgrade. That's the other version right. Down editioning is for certain products Microsoft allow using lower edition under a higher edition license. Here's a word of warning for you. That is an exception, and only a few products allow that. The basics, let me give you a few examples. Windows Server has down edition rights. If you assign a data center license to a server, then under that data center license, you will be able to run standard edition instances. That's the allowed down editioning. It doesn't work with Microsoft Office or Visio or Project. You may not run Project Standard under Project Professional license. So be careful with down edition. But the right to downgrade the version, it has always existed. It had certain deviations, but in the last probably 10 years, it's very clear. You can downgrade if it's a volume license, if it's not a box, because boxes, what you buy off the shelf in the shop, they may have their own rules. We're talking about enterprise licensing on this channel, corporate licensing, organization licensing. So those licenses, organization licenses, they may be they may be downgraded to any prior version. But the way it works is tricky, and I have just had an interesting discussion. I have just had it. We have been having this discussion for a few weeks now with a colleague of mine, and in the end, to resolve the ambiguity around our understanding of downgrade rights, we reached out to Microsoft Licensing Group. And a bit of knowledge for you. So if you don't know that, Microsoft Licensing Group is the last instance when something doesn't make sense in product terms, or if something is vague, you go to the Microsoft Licensing Group. You can't do it yourself. It used to be that you could do it yourself and go through your palm. It's not that easy anymore. But ask your Microsoft people, the ones you talk to, they will explain to you how that works. 99% they're gonna ask you also a customer's name for whom you're asking that question. Where is that situation that forces you to ask that question. So one thing about the licensing group that you must understand is that you must be very careful with what you ask, because if they haven't been asked that question before, and it's not guaranteed that they have been, they will have to go sit down and think. And a licensing group usually takes a very conservative position in regards to licensing. Therefore, if something is vague, they will treat it as you don't have that right. You can't do that. So, and that's the last instance. if something then comes from the licensing group, there's no argument anymore. That's it. It's the last sentence. It's your sentence. Nothing else could be done about it. This was my very long prelude. And hello everybody. If you send me a message in chat, just say where are you from, why are you here, and I will say hello as well. So let's have a look at that formula of the rights to use lower editions and other versions. This is exactly word by word as it is right now in the Microsoft product terms. And let me read from the slide. I don't remember that from my memory. I have the slide here and there, so I'll read from there. For any permitted copy or instance, every word is golden here. For any permitted copy or instance, customer may create, store, install, run, or access in place of the version licensed, a copy of instance of a prior version that was before, different permitted language version, blah, 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 available platform, or a permitted lower edition. So let's not touch editions today, because I've already touched on them a few minutes ago. And if you're just joining, this video will be here on demand and you will be able to watch it. Let's just talk about versions, because that's the easiest one. Because every product that is licensed through volume licensing, with the exception of online services, may be downgraded. So then there are a few other caveats which are also important. And by the way, I have specific slides for them today. The use rights for the licensed versions still apply. Licenses for prior versions and lower editions do not satisfy the license requirements for a product. Now, this first part is that key. Why I am guilty. I misinterpreted downgrade rights because I didn't read that. And I will draw, in a few seconds, I will draw it on my drawing board. So, this bit for any permitted copy or instance, let me do it again. Shaking hands. Any permitted copy or instance. So this is where we had all the discussions. So the initial question was, we had a server with, I'm not going to count, I'll just write 12 cores. And as we know, this is Windows Server. As we know, as you probably know, if you don't know, here's another bit of knowledge. The minimum number of cores you may assign to the server is 16. That's the rule. 16 cores. 16 cores is the minimum. What was supposed to be installed on this server was Windows Server Windows SVR 2016, pay attention to that, prior version, standard. This is what the customer intended to run on that server. In their circumstances, they only had 8 core licenses. So somewhere around that. And there was a gap. They didn't have enough licenses to cover this particular server. They reached out to a reseller who happens to be a friend of mine and a client of mine. And they asked them, maybe buy a Windows 2019 licenses, Windows Server 2019 standard, and assign them to that, to the missing, instead of the missing licenses for Windows Server Standard 2016. I made that mistake. I said, yes, you probably can do that. You probably may do that because, the logic that was in my head and in many other consultants' heads. And I'll tell you, the majority of consultants involved in that discussion, they all agreed with that. They said, well, because we're running the prior version, therefore partially we assign the course for that particular version, and then partially we assign course for the newer version, then we downgrade those licenses. Therefore, this server will be licensed for Windows Server 2016. Are you following, by the way? If type in the chat if you're following, if you're not following, if you want me to explain this again. To summarize, the question was sort of, is it possible, because we're using the same licensing metric, is it possible to mix 2 versions of licenses on the same server to license for the prior version. The logical chain of thought is, because we're running version 2016, we may assign partially the license for version 2016 and then partially license for version 2019. Then somebody who is more educated in this area told my friend, no, you may not do that. You may not do that. And in licensing, I'm reminding you, in licensing, if something is not explicitly granted to you, it's not. But also, it does make sense to look for any caveats, any explanations, any prior documents that were released on this matter. The only thing that we found, I'll try and switch that screen. Is it going to work? And if I switch the key off, this is a part of, this is a page, and I'm looking at that because it's on the screen. This is a page from Microsoft Windows Server 2016 licensing guide. This is right now the only document where this is at least remotely mentioned and explained. And then the response that we got from the Microsoft licensing group, basically saying, no, you may not mix that, was actually almost a quote from this. They probably did an internal research, they found this reference as well, and they responded with that. So what they say here is, not allowed to assign licenses of different versions or editions to the same physical server to license the physical cores on the server. That's it. And knowing how Microsoft works, knowing Microsoft logic, how Microsoft think about other products, appreciating this is not an official document. Any licensing guides from Microsoft, they don't have official status. They're explanations. But knowing how Microsoft works, and then having received that response from licensing group, which has official status, we unfortunately have to conclude that this applies to all the other products which are licensed per core or per processor in the previous versions that were licensed per processor. So we should stay away from assigning different versions to the same server to license physical cores. It, by the way, funny enough, does it apply to SQL Server, virtualized SQL servers? Because we're not licensing physical cores in that instance. This caveat only applies to physical cores. I don't know. I would be careful. I would avoid that as well, just in case, having learned from this exercise. I would not mix various versions on a single, either physical or a virtual server. With an exception, when you do license stacking for SQL Server license, it's too complicated for this live. If you want me to do a specific session on license stacking for virtualized SQL Server, I've already tried to do one. It wasn't that clear. Let me know. Let me know here. Let me know on LinkedIn. Leave a comment here. And by the way, I'm asking you if you like what we're talking about today. Only if you like it. You don't have to click like. Please click like on YouTube so other people will discover this video. This is how YouTube works. You like video, YouTube shows it to more people. They learn from this. Fewer mistakes in licensing. We're trying to remove nonsense and rubbish from licensing. Therefore, I would be really grateful if you click like if you like this. So that is it. So you may not, under any circumstances, cover the missing licenses with Windows Server 2019, even though you're running Windows Server 2016 on it. Why? We get into why. Because it says for any permitted copy or instance. So the logic here is you do not downgrade the license. There's no license downgrade. You may not just downgrade 4 core licenses to 2016. There's no such thing. It used to be simpler, and I started licensing in 1998. My first company, which was related and did services around licensing, I formed it in 2003. So since that time, when we dealt with instance licenses. There were no processor or core licenses at the time. We carried over that knowledge from that time, which you could still draw an equal sign between an instance and a license. Therefore, if you downgraded an instance, you also you thought that you're downgrading a license. But apparently, licenses are not downgradable. Licenses themselves. So you downgrade an instance, even if you imagine this. You need a bit of imagination here. If you have right now licenses for Windows Server 2019 standard, and you intend to run, say, Windows Server 2012 standard on that box, whether it's virtual or physical. So what you do first is you make sure you license the current version. You don't have to install it. It's sort of like hypothetical, pretend current version. You make sure you've got enough licenses assigned correctly for the current version. And then in place of that hypothetical Windows Server 2019, you run the prior version. So you may only downgrade the running version, from an already licensed instance. Does it make sense? That's why we may not mix various cores from various versions. This is why we may not do this. What's drawn on this? Let me show you again. Return to where I was. This is why we may not do this. Because in this case, a mixture of cores does not create a permitted copy or instance. It's quite unfortunate, because what it means is that this customer, instead of saving money and going out and just buying eight cores, they had to buy 16. So they paid twice the amount of they were expected to pay. It's not a huge sum of money. It's not a massive loss. If you're a big company, if you're a small company, you only have 2 servers. For me right now, my company is pretty small business. That would be a significant expense. But unfortunately, that's the rule, and we have to follow the licensing rules. Couple of other things in regards to downgrading instances to any prior version. So let me read this again. Licenses for prior versions and lower editions do not satisfy the licensing requirements for the product. Hope this is clear. What it says is, you may not run Windows Server 2019 under licenses for Windows Server 2016. Oh, this should be clear. This should be clear. You may only downgrade. You may only upgrade when you have software assurance and it's current. That's it. So licenses, and when you have software assurance, effectively you have licenses for the current version. So there's no conflict. You do not really assign license for Windows Server 2016. You assign license for Windows Server 2019. Very technical, too technical maybe. This should really be a simple thing to understand. You may not use prior version licenses to run the current version of software. I think it's not rocket science. I think it's black and white. The other important caveat is that is not that clear. So let's touch on it. The use rights for the licensed version still apply. What it means is Microsoft change licensing rules from version to version. They change metrics, they change limitations, they change rights, they change them. They're different. If you compare, and by the way, this is one of the most complicated things in Microsoft licensing. If you look at Oracle Database Enterprise Edition, licensing rules haven't changed in the last probably 20 years. In Microsoft licensing, each time there's a new version, there's something new. Well, not always, but there is something new. And you have both additional rights granted, but you also have things that are recalled. And a good example would be if you look at SQL Server. SQL Server 2008 R2, the version released in 2010, and the prior versions, they had SQL failover rights where you could then could deploy a DR copy. So let me draw this again. So I don't want to use red, I want to use white. So SQL Server, SQL 2008 R2. Fail overrides. So for every licensed instance of SQL Server, this one is licensed. I'll just draw like little license here. You may also run a disaster recovery passive instance for free without a license. So that right was granted for this version of SQL Server as built-in. You didn't need anything else. Comes SQL Server 2012, and up until today, now this disaster recovery copy, if you want it for free, you must have license plus active software assurance. And that's same thing happens with SQL Server 2019. So disregard the end of life of a product, because products can be end of life. Licenses are not end of life. If a license is perpetual, it's not a subscription license, it doesn't expire. Therefore, even if a product reaches end of life, you may still use that license, as long as you want, as long as you run the license to prior version. So, but if you don't have a license, and for some reason you still have to, for compatibility reasons, there's something that is working, don't touch it. I know there are security holes. I know it's a big risk, but I'm happy to run SQL Server 2008 R2 in the virtual machine somewhere. But then it appears I'm missing licenses. I did a licensing review. It appears I'm missing licenses. Now, what do? I need to buy licenses. Can I buy licenses for SQL Server 2008 R2? Well, not at least not from Microsoft resellers. You can look for, even if only if you're in Europe, you may buy a second-hand license. Yes, in Europe you may buy second-hand licenses, but in normal circumstances, for the majority of the world, for the rest of the world, you would have to buy licenses for SQL Server 2019. Now, what's important is that you assign current licenses, SQL Server 2019, to run under the downgrade rights, SQL Server 2008 R2. The rules come with the license. And what it means in this situation is that because you assigned this license requires software assurance. Therefore, even though you're running Windows SQL Server 2008 R2 in that instance, you may only deploy free. You may license it, but if you want a free disaster recovery instance, you may only have it for free if your SQL Server 2019 licenses came with active software assurance. Because limitations, all the rules apply, use rights for the licensed version apply to any prior installed version. What rules come with the assigned license, not with the version that is running. Downgrade rights in the Microsoft world are quite complicated. So I hope this was very much exprompt today, so I only had an hour to prepare. I hope this all makes sense. I'm thinking maybe there'll be a video that will be pre-recorded, scripted properly, with proper slides and drawings and stuff like that. Question time. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to ask any questions. And by the way, any questions not necessarily on the topic or the subject of today's live downgrade rights. If I know an answer, I'll just respond now. And if I don't know if I'm hesitant, I'll take it as a homework and we'll cover it in any of the future sessions. So, have you got any questions today? And by the way, thank you for joining. And just a quick reminder, if you like what I'm talking about right now, if you like the subject of this, the delivery. You may not like the subject. I don't like this subject, to be honest. I'm not a fan of licensing. I enjoy cracking licenses, but I'm not a fan of licensing. So click like if you can, if you like what we're talking about today. How I'm delivering. I'd be really grateful because that, you liking this video helps other people discover it. Other people like you. Wouldn't it be nice? I'm going to give you a couple, 1 or 2 minutes, and just flip through the slides again, just to see if we've missed anything. Just a reminder, this is where you can find me. Yeah, and this is where you can find the channels page on LinkedIn. So while we're waiting for questions, thank you. I want to say thank you, because we've just passed the 1,000 subscribers point on this channel last week. Therefore, we're eagerly waiting for YouTube to finally enable the community tab. And when YouTube enables the community tab, we won't be just bound to LinkedIn to build community. We'll be able to have community discussions here on YouTube. We're going to have polls here on YouTube. LinkedIn polls will still stand, and this is the only live since I think February in which we didn't have a poll. I just used one of the previous popular topics. But next live like this will be 10 o'clock London time in a couple of weeks from now. They're not weekly anymore, at least for the time of the trainings, because, well, trainings take a lot of effort, and because we're doing them free, obviously we need to take some time off the paid customers. So please join. Next Wednesday, there's a SQL Server related live at 2 o'clock London time on this channel. I will announce it on this channel today or tomorrow, but it's already announced on LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, please just find it there. And what that's going to be, it's going to be blueprint for SQL Server optimization. 7th of July. Chitali, thank you. Yes, hello Nitai as well. Thank you for being here. And yes, I'm well. Hope to see you in a couple of weeks. And next week, by the way, next week, on the SQL live. On the SQL Server optimization live. So thanks very much, and have a great productive week, and safe with knowledge of licensing. Bye bye.